So thank you very much for coming today, and thank you for your patience in waiting while we had a few gremlins in the system. And welcome to Getting Started with Your PhD. I'm Petra Boynton, and I specialise in helping students and staff get their research done more ethically and effectively and inclusively. And today I'm going to talk from the perspective of having taught supervisors, being a supervisor myself, and also doing a PhD once a long time ago. We're also going to use a lot of your questions that you've sent in advance. So hopefully the things you want to know will be covered as we go through. If you are watching live today and you'd like to ask a question, please click the Q&A button at the top of the right-hand side of your Microsoft Teams screen and enter your question. And I made that probably sound a lot more complicated than it is. So let's begin your PhD adventure. Hopefully all of you are either right at the early stages or about to, and it's a very exciting time. Congratulations, you're doing a PhD. I think that's such a nice thing to know and to say and to share. So it's also something to remind yourself of, and a great feeling to hold on to. Now, before you go any further, I'd like to do something with you, which I always do with my PhD students, which is to encourage you to either record yourself or to write yourself a letter and to share some reflections that you're going to talk about with your supervisor, but you're also going to keep this and look back on it when you finish your PhD. And those questions that you can answer for yourself are, why do you want to do this PhD? What are your goals? What do you want to get from it? Where are you now in your life? So what's brought you to this place? What's brought you to doing a PhD? And all those questions are really helpful because if you share them with the supervisor and other colleagues and other people on the doctoral programme, they'll be able to explain to you how realistic they are and prepare you for change, which is inevitably going to come. But also, what about you? Are you full-time, part-time? Are you funded or like me, self-funded? Are you coming straight from an undergraduate or master's, or have you been in the workplace? Maybe you're working alongside your PhD, and you might be a parent or a carer, you might have other responsibilities, you might be sick or disabled. There may be other things going on in your life that are really important to contextualize how this PhD is going to go for you. And that in turn can help you identify support needs. Now, you might know what they are already. Some of them you'll probably discover as you go along the way, but they're also useful if you do know what you need to have that ready so you can talk to the doctoral programme, talk to your supervisor, anticipate any blocks and barriers. Is there something coming up later next year that you're worried about or that you know is going to get in the way? It might be a nice thing, it might be more of a tricky thing. All those things can be anticipated now. And finally, think about what are your feedback requirements. It might be you need stuff in writing. It might be that you need stuff explained very gently. It might be that you need a very kind of boot camp approach. I don't know what you would need, but thinking about that can really help your supervisor and get you sorted as well. It's also a really good idea now, if you haven't already, to start a diary. Some of you will have done this in a very formal way because a lot of doctoral programs now have set things you have to feed back on to document that you've met with your supervisor and that you're showing progress at an expected rate on the PhD. But you might also want to keep it as a very informal thing that you do where you reflect on what's going on. And I do that whether or not you're actually doing a qualitative or quantitative PhD, because that journey that you go on and the way that you're feeling and the things that are happening, you will forget. So if you choose to become a supervisor yourself in the future, those are things useful to go back to. But also when you're trying to do your data analysis or writing up, you'll forget some of the stuff you're doing now, and that context is really useful. So your first question that you asked us was, what should I expect from a PhD? Now, every university, every doctoral programme and every person's experience will differ, but it's really important to know what your institution wants, what they expect, particularly if you're full-time or part-time, because it can vary. So I think before you do anything else, if you haven't looked at any kind of regulations, any expectations, any documentation, again, most doctoral programmes now have specific resources for their doctoral students, and you're probably so excited starting, you haven't read them, and if you're like me, you probably read them just before the Viva. But basically, it's a good time to read them now. A lot of stress I found among postgraduates happen because they don't know what to expect. It's either they're expecting too much or they just don't know who to ask. They also often assume that no one's going to help, so therefore they shouldn't ask, or that they should know all this by now. This is an entirely new experience. A lot of it's quite bureaucratic and complicated, so it's a really good idea to check what you should be doing and confirm that with your supervisor. So remember, a PhD is a partially guided and formalised study process with some instruction for core skills, but you are expected to be an independent learner, and you will become more independent as you go. A lot of people, again, find that quite a surprise, and it depends by PhD. For some of them, you'll have much more lab-based work with a lot more supervision on a kind of almost daily basis. For others, you might not see anybody for a while, especially if you're doing field work. So again, work out what your specific needs are and what are you supposed to be doing. And if you don't know, keep asking. Don't think everyone expects you to know, you shouldn't ask, keep asking. Another question you had was, what should a PhD be like? It should be exciting, it should be confidence building, it should be enjoyable, it should extend your knowledge and your skills and open up future opportunities. And I say that because although all of you, I think, have chosen to go on a PhD or want to be on your PhD, the way that a lot of people begin a PhD now is almost as if I dragged you in and made you start doing a PhD, even though you didn't really want to do one. It shouldn't be awful. It should be a lovely experience. It shouldn't make you feel distressed. It shouldn't cause or worsen mental distress or health problems. If you are struggling with those issues at the beginning, again, build security, build scaffolding, build support around you, so that actually if there are tricky times, either you get some extension of time or you get support and understanding. And if you don't, that's a red flag. Doctoral programs increasingly are being held to account for ensuring this support and accommodations are there. A PhD should not be a case of not having any free time. It may feel all-consuming at times. There may be times you have to give a lot of time to it. That doesn't mean you don't get rest periods. It should not be destroying your friendship or your family. Again, a lot of people feel like they have to give everything to it. And again, if you're being made to feel that by a PI or a PhD supervisor, that's a problem with them. You need to take it back to the doctoral program because they're supervising you incorrectly. When I was doing my PhD, we were taught that suffering was a badge of honour, that if you weren't suffering, it wasn't an authentic PhD experience. And I think we've really worked hard to stop supervisors saying that now, but often PhD students say it to each other. So I'm saying at this point, your good research skills that you're learning right from the start is not to overburden and overload yourself. This is a job, it's a form of training, and it's a step of progress to other careers that may or may not be academic. You also wanted to know, what should you expect from your supervisor? Well, your supervisor should want to know about you. They should begin to understand your research question. They'll bring their expertise to bear, and ideally you'll have more than one supervisor who can help support you throughout the time, ask different questions and guide you. They're going to question you, they're going to stretch you, they're going to challenge you, and sometimes they will disagree with you. But that shouldn't be a combative thing. It should be presented in the sense that it's actually developing. Often people come into a PhD very confident because you've often been quite a high flyer before, or perhaps you're a bit nervous if you're returning to study. And it's quite a shock to discover that actually, although you want to do this thing for your PhD, you don't know it all yet. And in fact, some people might disagree with you. So learning that, but in a supported way, is an important thing. You should expect to have disagreements, but again, not bullying, not shouting, not belittling. You will meet regularly with your supervisor, and the regularity of that will change over time. At some point, it will be a lot, depending on what's going on with your work or your personal life. Sometimes it will little. Sometimes it depends on what they're doing. They may be away, and at that point, again, a secondary supervisor should be helping out. A lot of people are very shocked or disappointed to discover that they won't have a supervisor on call 24/7, or that the supervisor is not taking them stepwise through what they're doing. You're expected to come up with ideas, think them through, work them through, go back and talk to them, your supervisor, about them. And it develops and extends from there. Some people find that very nerve-wracking, but it is part of the process. And writing down what you want to talk about, sending that in advance, having a dialogue loop, having things recorded can really help them. You will formalise the interactions. This should not be based on you chasing a supervisor, writing up minutes, trying to have conversations. This should come from the doctoral office. Very often now it's electronically based, and you will be recording when you met. What were you discussing? What were the decided outcomes, and where do you go? If that's not being provided, ask for it. And if it's not being adhered to by your supervisor, again, it goes back to either your graduate school or the wider university, or your funder if you have one. Also, you can expect your supervisor will know less than you by the time you finish. The roles switch. They still know a lot about what they know, but you will become expert by the time you get on. And it's okay to say to your supervisor, I don't agree with you. And sometimes, really annoyingly, you will find that they were right all along and the thing you wanted to do didn't work out. And sometimes you will be right, and that's okay. Your graduate school is also going to do similar to your supervisor, but they're going to organise your training and career support. They will explain rules and regulations to you. They're the people who can also help with extensions. They will signpost you to support. They will also organise meetups and socials. And if that's not happening, ask. Can you have a Friday afternoon catch up with your postgraduate friends on and offline? Can you share things? They're also going to help explain your targets, and your supervisor will help you meet the targets. But ultimately, the person who gets you to the targets is going to be you. So if you're like me and find that really difficult, I'll explain a bit more about how you manage it. But the important thing to also remember is, although your supervisor and your graduate school is there to offer you support to go through, they're not a therapist, they're not a counsellor, they're not going to give you pastoral care in perhaps the way you expected it or had it before as an undergraduate. Sometimes you'll have been very independent, but some of you may have had a lot of help. If you need extra help, I'll explain a bit more about where you can get that from. It doesn't mean you don't share problems. In fact, it's better to early on. But what you wouldn't necessarily expect is your supervisor is going to anticipate issues and explain them to you without you asking or saying what you need. Another question you had was, how can I manage my time? And the first thing you do, if you haven't already, is get your diary, whether it's a paper one or an electronic one, and you block your periods of rest and your holidays, and you take all the holiday that you're entitled to. This is an essential research skill. If you don't know how to do this, you will not be able to look after yourself. But in the future, when you're managing other people, you won't know how to do it for them. So you begin with yourself. You also know non-negotiable time off, and that's particularly important if you have to have any medical treatment, if you're a parent or carer, if there are things coming up that you have, religious obligations or anything like that, is all blocked off. It's good sometimes to have shared calendars, so your doctor or your supervisor knows what's going on, or you can alert them when you won't be available. And a lot of people are like, oh, I can't start doing that, that's rude. It's not. You need to block off this time because everyone needs to know, and then that shows you what time you've got left. You need to get to know your doctoral office because they're going to tell you what's happening. And you also need to know about the requirements of what's going to happen in this first year. You can identify the training and support that's going to need to help you both with your research skills, time management, study skills and the like. And it's time also to start brushing up on course skills. You often think, oh, I'll go in and I know all how to do it, but actually you suddenly find you've forgotten how to do a literature review, or that reading at PhD level is very different, as is note taking. So again, ask a doctoral program, the library, who can offer training with it. It's a good time to pick your reference management software, because you're going to have lots of information to archive, and to create a study schedule. This is particularly important if you're part-time, or if you're a parent or a carer, or if you've got any other needs that are going to get in the way. Some people like a very rigorous set schedule. Other people are kind of a bit more creative. It's good to be able to swap tasks in. So say, for example, today you wanted to go to the library, but there's a rail strike. You can work from home instead on a different task. However, you need to balance it, and a study schedule is really useful, so you know what's happening in this week, this day and this time, so you can tick off tasks and get them done and hold yourself accountable if, again, you're like me and you find that quite difficult. A lot of people work backwards from the end of this year. So what's happening at the end of your first year of your PhD or the second year of your part-time? It's usually an upgrade, and that's to work out whether you're progressing onto the formal PhD program. So at this point, you're still kind of in a probationary period. And again, different institutions and different degrees have different ways of working, but find out what's going to happen. Is there an assessment? Is there an upgrade? Is there a meeting or presentation? When is it happening? Put that in your diary and work back from there, noting what is going to have to happen along the way to get you to that point. So what skills do you need to learn? What part of the literature do you need to have looked at? Are there any additional studying or training you need to have? When are you going to meet your supervisor? Are there going to be mini deadlines you're going to fit in between to have finished reading this section of work, or writing this section of work, or refining a question, writing an abstract? Your university may provide you with time planners, but it might not. But don't worry, because at the end of this, I'm going to give you a whole load of resources to help you with your PhD that you can look. And one of them will be some free time planners, which I didn't create, that someone called Hugh Kearns did, and they're very useful. Remember, when you're planning your time, everything takes a lot longer than you think. So give yourself more time for it. And if it turns out you don't need that time, you could either have a nice rest or a treat, or you can do something else instead. It also gives you a bit more leeway if you are worrying about deadlines. And if something goes wrong, and it absolutely will, tell somebody right away. It doesn't need to be a list of complaints that you're not happy with stuff, but it's much more like the fact that you were expecting to have got your literature review done by, say, next April, but for reasons outside your control, it's probably going to be more like to the end of May. You can be flexible, and again, this is a research skill you will use throughout your life as a researcher. Again, if like me, you find time management tricky, now is the time to get additional support, other scaffolding in place, maybe speak to Disabilities Office if you have one at your university, if you have issues with executive functioning. It's also really overwhelmed when we're thinking about time and how much there is to be kind of either think you've got loads of time or no time at all, that you're going to be able to do everything, or you're completely overwhelmed, that you're an absolute expert, or why did you even bother? And that kind of roller coaster continues throughout the PhD. It's part of the process, but it's important to recognise that there's going to be fun times and tricky times and a lot of mundane times. So a lot of what you'll be doing is setting out this work that's ahead, is around almost like sort of task scheduling, so that the boring stuff gets done as well as the exciting bits. And you might need to schedule the exciting bits in momentarily throughout the process as something to aim for, something to work for, and keep you motivated. Your first year is to explore. It's reflecting. You might well change your direction. You'll probably change your question. And that is an entirely important and normal part of the process. Everything you're doing, all this sort of finding your way, you often feel like it's because you don't know what you're doing or you're a novice. Actually, this finding your way is an integral part of research. And again, even though you'll get better at it and more practice, the pattern will repeat whatever project you're doing in the future. And again, if you're disabled or a parent or carer, or you have any accommodation needs, now is the time to ask for them, even if you don't think you need them at the moment. Some other places you can get help. Well, I've said the library already. They have so much useful stuff, and you will be surprised how many training things they'll do on things like how to search the literature, how to read a paper, how to use reference management software. You might be lucky and have a study skills department in your university as well. And again, don't assume that's just for undergraduates. A lot of people use that for help with writing, with grammar, with particularly if you're working in an additional language. If you are an international student, contact the International Students Office. They will often have other support, socials, ways of making you feel connected. And also if you've got questions about visas, any other issues going on, they can help you. Most universities have welfare and counselling, not always easy to access. And absolutely, there is no reason that doing a PhD means you need it, but just in case you think you do, you know, ask if you haven't been referred or if you don't know where to find it. And again, if it's not referred by your doctoral office, ask the student union. Your funding body will often have additional training for you, additional support, additional resources, including things like planners and time management. You can ask them for training, and you might also want to double check, because sometimes they will have conditions that your stipend or your funding comes with you attending particular events, conferences, training and the like. So make sure you know and put that in your diary if that's coming up as well. Join professional bodies. Lots of them have postgraduate societies. Those can be invaluable for connecting with people who are at similar or the same stages of the journey, who you can have a really good moan to and also celebrate wins with and learn from. Many universities now also have mentors or peer supporters or buddy systems, and if they don't, you can set this up informally on or offline with people doing PhDs in other places. And that job is basically someone who's a little bit further ahead than you, sympathising, giving tips, explaining and encouraging you to do stuff. They've kind of already been there, so they can help you avoid mistakes that they've made. Join societies, join hubs, join clubs in and outside university. Don't let things like your hobbies, your interests, stuff you've loved doing stop because you're doing a PhD. But also it's quite a good time to take up something else you enjoy, and that might be meditation, it might be crafting, it might be watching movies, it might be looking out the window for half an hour every day and just watching the world go by. It could be joining a band, you know, really just something that takes your mind off it, because this can feel just completely all encompassing, and you bore yourself at times. So, you know, give yourself that opportunity to do other things, be a rounded person. It really helps your scholarship because you need that time away to break, to think, to reflect. Have a notebook on your phone or pen and paper, because your best ideas will always happen as soon as you stop thinking about your PhD. You might want to go to conferences and events, not necessarily to present, but just to catch the energy, get the ideas, connect with people and network. And also perhaps do some online resources and training. Again, your supervisor, your doctoral program, university, postgraduate networks, all of those places can help. So I'm going to pause there because I've sort of given you a whistle-stop tour of the answers to your questions. But if you would like to ask me some questions for the next few minutes, and then I'll give you a couple of top tips. Don't forget, we're recording this, and there'll be recording and the transcripts available later, as well as I'm going to give you sort of a handout with these top tips, these answers and resources for you as well. So don't panic if you thought, oh gosh, she went through that really quickly. I don't know quite what to ask. I'm going to have a quick look in the Q&A and see if you've given me any questions. And if not, oh my goodness, yes, I have. Lovely. What level of feedback should I get from my supervisors about data collection tools? Good question. It will depend on your PhD. It will depend on how far you're going. The more that you progress, I would expect that the feedback in a way will become less. So say, for example, we're doing questionnaire together and you give me your first draft of your questionnaire and I will probably scribble all over it. And hopefully I'll do that in a way that doesn't make you feel completely dispirited. But the second time we meet, I will have expected you to have perhaps read about questionnaire design, maybe gone on a questionnaire training course that's been organised by the doctoral programme or you've sorted yourself, to have taken on board my feedback, to have put all that together and to have extended it. So when we meet again, the feedback is really more about what did you change and why, which you'll have recorded in your diary or your reflections. So you know what you did and why you did it, because those reflections will be something you might get asked in the Viva. And that's how it will kind of roll on, ideally. If you are kind of constantly having to be told how to keep doing the basics over and over again, it might be that there's a breakdown in communication that you need to say, look, I just don't understand what you're asking me to do. Can you give me extra training? But it really over time should evolve. And if you think back to some time when you've learned another skill, the first time you did it, you read a lot, you learned a lot, you watched other people, you asked for feedback and you took that on board. But the second time, the third time and the 11th time, you weren't having to ask for that anymore. And then let's have a look at some new questions, sorry. So in presenting my first year research plan, how much information should I present in my experiments and deliverables? Again, it will depend on the kind of PhD you're doing and the support you have. Early on, you've probably got a very broad idea. So you kind of know what you want to do, or you've been told what you're going to do, but you might not be quite sure how to get there. So that's where your literature reviewing, experimenting, observing, being trained, learning, listening, talking comes in. So that what often happens is you'll come in with a set idea, but several months down the line, and particularly by the end of your first year upgrade, that has probably changed. Sometimes you'll start with your data collection and your work quite a lot earlier in the process, but for a lot of you in this first year, or the first 6 months particularly, that research plan is what you're working on. And it's quite common to be thrown by the fact that you come in and you think, oh my gosh, I know everything, or I know what I want to do, and then you find actually you didn't know as much as you thought you did, or you can't do what you want to do, or you tried it and it didn't work. And all that is part of that learning process. Okay, let me have a look. How to counter a fear of doing experiments considering my undergraduate projects were mostly online due to COVID? That is such an amazing question. And in fact, it's made me think that we almost need to have an entirely different session on something like that, because you're correct. A large number of you who are coming into PhDs now who did an undergraduate during COVID times probably did online things, and a lot of it may have been, you know, limited to literature reviewing or kind of group projects that were online. I would say that the thing to think about is you've probably built up a load of really brilliant skills you don't know about. So your literature reviewing, your online working, your connections, your reflections, your agile working is probably much better than if that hadn't happened. However, I think it's fair to say you may well be coming in at a much lower level than you would have done because you haven't had that practice. I know some graduate programs are actually giving extra training now and also more lab or experimental time. It also applies for people who perhaps did qualitative research, but they did it all online, or creative research online, and they now want to do it in communities. But things like going and working in communities, if you've not done it, can feel really overwhelming. And there's a load of safety and well-being things to think about. So do not be scared. And if you want to say, you can blame me for this and say, Petra said, that you should be asking for this additional training. It's not a deficit on your part, it's a problem of COVID. You just need some up to speed things. And some places are doing summer schools or boot camps or weekends or retreats just to give you that opportunity. Also, once you've been taught it, don't expect to know it just because you've done it once. Keep going and ask for extra tuition if you need to. Somebody has said, I did my master's more than a decade ago. I'm not sure what to do. Where can I get assistance on what research topics to look into? So I think that having an idea is useful, exploring that, taking what you remember from your master's. With the resources I'm going to share will give you an idea of what to expect from a PhD, because that is a jump from a master's. But also, I'm glad to say things have hugely improved for PhDs in the last decade, even if it doesn't feel like it, they really, really have. So there's that. I would also look out for advertised PhD places. So again, you'll see them on jobs.ac.uk, you'll see them on LinkedIn, you'll see them on social media. Joining professional bodies, people will be asking for PhD candidates. So you might want to say that instead of actually having to think of an idea yourself, there's an interesting topic that somebody's advertising it and you apply for that way. If you don't have a scholarship and bursary and need to work part-time or full-time, is it possible to do a PhD? How much live classes do we have per week? Good question. Yes, it's possible. Is it difficult? Yes. Would I have done a PhD unfunded if I had the choice to be funded? No, it's much, much easier doing it funded. Lots of people, however, part fund, so they are funded, but they're doing their PhD part-time because, say, they're a clinician or a teacher and they're working alongside it. It's not so much about live classes because, again, the PhD process, although you might have some live tuition, it's much more about the fact that you're going to have to discipline yourself to do lots of extra study. So yes, you might have a meeting with your supervisor and there might be a live class, it might be on or offline, to understand how to do particular research methods or understand how to present or to analyze data. That might be included, or you might need to add it yourself. But outside of that, the literature searching, the reading, the refining, the reflecting, the practicing of your core skills is all down to you. So that's where often people find it tricky with a part-time PhD, because everything just takes longer and you're constantly interrupting. Again, it doesn't mean it's impossible, because lots of us do it and some of us like it because we like that kind of jumping around. But you've got to keep records of everything you did, because I promise you will forget. Let me have a look. Oh, okay. So someone's saying here, I'm in my early 30s and feel a bit embarrassed in my age compared to everyone else. Any tips on how to turn age to your advantage? It won't. So I know people do PhDs in their 70s and 80s. Do a PhD whenever you like. A PhD is the thing that's important for you, that it's a milestone for you and it's meaningful for you. It's not a competition. Some people who are younger will come fresh from college and that will give them some advantages and a lot of disadvantages. They may well be expecting an awful lot more support. They might find the jump to PhD level quite tricky. If you're older, particularly if you've worked in between, doing an undergraduate or master's degree and a PhD, there's an enormous amount of life experience and practical skills you'll be bringing. So I think it's about, you will have skills, they will have skills. I think if you're doing an undergraduate degree when there's an age difference, it's harder. But I think in a lot of doctoral programs, you'll find there's older people, and there are networks for postgraduates who are older, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. So I think don't panic about it. There's a lot of ageism in this area. It's bizarre that you've got to have everything done by the time you're 25. I started my PhD at 21, didn't finish it till I was 28, 29. Life got in the way. And it was better. It was better as a consequence. So it says a doctor has replied to my request to be my supervisor and contacted his colleague to be the second supervisor, but no information yet. Should I keep looking? No, really, that needs to be dealt with by the doctoral program. If somebody has offered you and they've accepted you, then you go with that, and you then say, once you're enrolling with that person committed to be your supervisor, you need an additional one. You can look around, but generally, and some universities differ, it's your responsibility, but generally that's for the doctoral program to firm up. Let's have a look. I've got some specific questions for people about, do places fund PhDs and what are there? I don't know. So the best thing is, if you're not sure, go and look on that university's website and see what they offer. Is it possible to have a plan for part-time so I know I'm doing enough or expected? Yes, I'll share some resources for part-time planning as well. But basically, the way I found it worked for me is that I knew what I had to do. I knew I had more time to do it because I was part-time. I put in the life events, I put in the time I needed away, I put in my work hours because I was working, and then I scheduled in all the other steps that I needed to get from the sort of basically I did it on a 2-year basis rather than a 1-year basis. Somebody's saying, if you couldn't get lab training, if you're selected, you need to say that the pandemic got in the way. But I think some people now are doing voluntary work or research assistantship roles, or volunteering to help train on kids programs, summer schools, all sorts of things to get that lab experience up. But I would, again, professional societies really need to be helping a bit more with this, of giving us training. I'm trying to understand the time if you do full time. How much time during the week do you have to study full time? As I work full time as well. Okay, so if you're working full time and you can't work full time and do a PhD full time, you just cannot. You could work full time compressed hours, which is what I did, and then I did the PhD at the weekend. But I only did my writing up doing that, and it was exhausting. You'll burn out. You will absolutely burn out. So the way I've seen people work this is, either they do the PhD part-time and they work full-time, but they either compress their hours, or they try and get their employer to give them time off so they can either have study breaks, or they can do restricted hours, or they reduce their hours. But basically, I think, again, a lot of people feel that, perhaps wrongly, that the PhD is only a bit more difficult than an undergraduate degree. Academically, it's a huge jump. But the biggest jump I found was the volume of work and the focus and the dedication. And I think if you're already occupied full time, even if you're not that into your job, having to also jump around, especially if you've got other parent carer responsibilities, it's not impossible, but it is absolutely exhausting, and you have to be very regimented. So I think if you wanted to work full time, reduce the hours if you can afford it, or take some leave, or compress your hours if that's permissible, or change your shifts. But you still need priority. Put those breaks in. You cannot do 3, 6 to 8 to whatever years. This takes a long time, and not have hobbies and respite and family and relationships and friendships. Those things will always be there. The PhD, your jobs are secondary to all that. And I know some people will tell you otherwise, but they're just privileged to enjoy this as a hobby. And I promise you, if anyone is telling you that everything comes up first, the research comes first, all of their life admin and everything else and their income and all that is taken care of. It's just a hobby for them. That's not a great model for you to be learning with. I think that is all of your questions so far. I appreciate we're kind of jumping through an awful lot of stuff. I mean, the thing I really would like is that all of you enjoy this process, even the boring bits. Because it should be something that benefits you and helps you. I definitely have a think about, we've talked about setting your target at the end of that first year, but I would definitely think about setting your target about when you get to the Viva, and what are you going to do next? What do you want your career to look like? And investigate ones that aren't just in academia. So what other jobs could you be doing? What skills are you developing? What training do you need to get you to that point? And if it helps you to have a mood board or a picture or a goal or a target, or write something up about, this is where I'm going and this is why. You, as I said at the beginning, when you're writing that letter or your story, there's something that's brought you here. It might be about wanting to progress your career, or make your parents proud, or earn good money, or change your life, or pay back all those people who said you never make it. It doesn't matter, but there'll be a story driving it, and holding on to that with any visual ways you can, or tactile ways to remind you, can be really important. Is there any age restriction to receive funds for PhD? Depends on country, I think, but please don't quote me on that. It's generally more about ability and competition. generally, I would say. I think that's the tricky part. And it is competitive. It is. I mean, I think this session is much more for people who are already started, but I appreciate some of you probably want to get started and don't have the funding yet or a PhD yet. And we are going to return to that in future because I know it's something that comes up a lot. I'd also say, obviously, I want you to go and look on jobs.ac.uk as much as possible because there's loads of really useful resources. But I also add that if any of you here today are in low or middle income countries and you want to get additional help with a lot of study skills, finding PhDs, etc., I'm just typing in the chat now. I don't actually know if you can see it because we might have turned it off. So I might also, but there's Author Aid. If you make a note of that, and I'll include it in my list. They are a brilliant charity. They've got loads of free resources, training and stuff like that, that if you're looking for a PhD could really help you. Do you think there's a negative perception out there in relation to professional doctorate versus PhD? Not that I've ever encountered, no. It's the same as, did you self-fund or not? Were you part-time or not? While you're doing it, there is some people doing PhDs aren't very nice, and they kind of like, because I'm funded, I'm better, or because I'm doing a PhD in this way, it's better, or because it's in STEM, it's better. Or basically, a PhD that's a done PhD is your PhD, and it's a good PhD. That's it. You know, no one ever asked me since I got my PhD how it was funded or how long it took, or, you know, it was just taken for granted I'd done that thing. And then I was on to the next list of things I had to do. What are the key skills you could advise someone who hasn't done academic research in a while? Oh, that's a great one. So I would say reading up a lot on the how-tos of research, and I'll make sure that's included. Webinars, sitting in on talks, looking up stuff online. YouTube's a bit hit and miss, but there's some brilliant videos out there. The Open University's got some really good ones. Most universities actually now have got really good comms departments where they'll put their stuff that they've been doing. Go and have a look at that. What do the people do? Look for reflective things where they're telling you about the research. But I think also make a note of where you feel less confident. So even though, say, you know you want to investigate the long-term mental health of young people from the pandemic, you know you're going to have to do some focus groups in that, and you haven't ever done them, you could start learning about it. Again, the first year of your PhD is acquiring skills. When the things I teach now, the things I'm good at now, I was rubbish at when I started my PhD. In fairness, I was still quite rubbish at them when I finished my PhD, and I was still moderately rubbish at them during my postdoc. You get better as you go onwards, and we're always learning. I'm doing this with you now, but I'm doing training myself later because I need to know about certain aspects of stuff that I've forgotten. Someone says, should I maintain a notebook or logbook to record everything I do related to your project? So if you are doing an experimental medical research, science-based, lab-based piece of work, you will normally be required to keep a lab book, and sometimes it's even visual diaries, so recording photograph evidence and things now, because of quality control, rigor, audits and such like. If you are not required to do that, and ask your program, they'll tell you if you need to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, don't assume, like I did when I started on a job and someone kind of threw a logbook at me, that I knew how to do this. I was writing really long descriptions in a sort of Dear Diary style of what I thought about stuff, and then I discovered all I had to do was write down like how many visits and what I did and what I found. So ask what you have to do, how often you have to fill it in, and if you're not having to do that formally, I think even if it's voice notes, that you can always, convert to text, or just sketching or drawing. People do a photo, every week of their PhD of how they're feeling, or a video diary. I think that it's crucial that when you do something, that you make notes of it. And I'm really glad I did with my PhD, because I think the longer I've moved away from it, even when I'm supervising, I know it's really hard and I know it's really stressful, but it's only when I go back and I read my own story at the time of just what that felt like that I have a lot more sympathy. And it's not that I'm not sympathetic with people I'm supervising, but I'm like, I've got a job to do, I've got to get them through it. Whereas it helps to go back and remember, and you never know what you might need to say in the viva, so all that stuff is data. Please do also give me a wave if I am going over time, because I could talk about this all day, which might be great for me, but you might tire eventually. Does a PhD is a PhD a learning process or a real contribution to academic work? It's both, and I think we forget that. And I think especially if you are in a very kind of pushy and competitive environment where they're talking about, you've got to do this work and it's going to change the world and it's got to be published. And when I did my PhD, I had published before I'd finished, but it wasn't expected. Whereas now the pressure is ridiculous. You've got to learn the skills to help you do that first. So you need to understand peer review and what is plagiarism and how to cite and how to write and how to correct and how to do different methods and how to clean your data and save your data and present and find lots and lots of different ways to navigate this space. And if you're neurodivergent or if you're working in an additional language or if you're working in another country, there's all these other hidden steps and barriers and things that you've got to kind of get through as well. So that whole thing is huge. I think it's really, really helpful that you think of it as a two-part thing. The key thing you're learning, it's a job, it's an apprenticeship. You're learning to be a researcher. So all these skills, these uncertainties, these mistakes are important and they're part of it. At the end of it, you should have a thesis. If you're lucky, you might have presented at some conferences. I think conferences are great for getting feedback and making you really think about your work and pushing your PhD onwards. You might have a paper in press, you might have published, you might not have done. It doesn't make you a terrible person if you haven't. It makes you a terrible supervisor if you're telling people that that's the case. So you might make a contribution. If I'm truly honest, did my PhD change the world? No, it didn't. Was it that good? I've looked at marked some recently where mine's actually quite embarrassing in comparison. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about me. What did I really learn? I learned I could do it. I learned I could be a researcher. I learned research skills, and I learned by looking at the world in a kind of slightly, I don't know, not quite fitting in way, because I wasn't funded and I was part-time and I was sick throughout my PhD as well. And I've later realised that I'm also very neurodivergent. Not very neurodivergent, I'm just neurodivergent. It just feels very neurodivergent today. But all of that gave me a different perspective, and it's that's made me good at teaching. It's that's made me good at research. It's that's made me write books about how to do research and do what I'm doing now, which is sharing my passion about it. So it's a journey, and I expect in 10 years' time I'll be extending it even further, and I hope all of you are as well. I think we might have run out of questions, so I'm going to wrap up if that's okay with you. And I gave myself one further tip, and my further tip is this. Use social media with care. I think it's brilliant for postgraduates. I think you can connect, you can meet people all over the world, you can have a really good chat about what matters to you, and you are with like-minded people. You never have to feel alone. So it's brilliant, and it's really good for finding resources, finding courses. You probably found out about this probably from social media, and you can chat to people, you can connect with people, you can find people like me and other people who like talking about research, and you can, ask us questions and we can reply, and it's amazing. However, there's also loads of absolutely rubbish advice out there. There's loads of really dodgy essay mills and people who will encourage you to plagiarize and do all sorts of dodgy stuff. So you don't want to encounter them. But also I think it can become the zone of competitive suffering, in that you've got people saying, oh yes, I haven't worked, I haven't slept all weekend and I live on coffee and my life is terrible, and you're not really doing a PhD if you haven't got a therapist. That's really destructive. So I would say use it very strategically and carefully, and have very long breaks from it. And especially if you're like me, where it's like catnip and you want to be on it all the time, shut it off when you've got writing and other work to do. Or also when you're not working but you're with family, because you don't want to just use your downtime to just switch off onto another thing and also then suddenly go back onto your research. So if you're looking for more information on any of the topics covered in today's session, please visit careeradvice.jobs.ac.uk, and I hope I've got that right, but we will make sure you get sent all the links to this anyway afterwards. And there's loads of stuff, there's loads of reading, there's loads of other webinars, there's lots of stuff you can find, so have a good browse through, especially if you're returning to study after a while. The recording of this webinar will be available next week, and it's going to be on the jobs.ac.uk website. I'll also share it if you're following me on social media. I used to be active on Twitter and I've kind of given up there now, but I am on LinkedIn. So if you just look for my name, it's Petra Boynton. On there you'll find me, and I'll make sure it's shared on there with all the resources as well, so you'll definitely get those. If you want to recap on any of the topics covered or share it with your network, go back and visit Network and follow us on social media. And on behalf of jobs.ac.uk and myself, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and we hope you found the information shared very helpful. Bye.